The morning fog hung thick over the rolling hills of eastern France near the village of Arracourt. September 19, 1944, and Sergeant Jack Shepherd peered through the periscope of his M4 Sherman tank, trying to penetrate the grey murk that reduced visibility to barely 50 yards. At 19 years old, he'd been in France for only 3 months, having arrived as a replacement after the Normandy breakout. His crew was even younger. The loader was 18, fresh from Kansas, with 6 months of training. The gunner had turned 20 the week before. They were kids operating 30 tons of American steel against the most formidable armour the Wehrmacht could field. Shepherd knew the Germans were coming. Intelligence reports had warned of a major counterattack. German reinforcements from the retreating armies further north were being concentrated for a strike against General George Patton's Third Army. The objective was to cut off the American advance, relieve pressure on German forces, and perhaps even recapture recently liberated territory. The German units included some of the best remaining Panzer divisions, equipped with Panther tanks that were superior to the Sherman in nearly every measurable way. On paper, this should have been a German victory. The young Americans in their outmatched tanks were about to prove that paper specifications meant nothing compared to training, tactics, and determination. The Battle of Arracourt emerged from the broader context of the Allied breakout from Normandy. Operation Cobra in late July had shattered German defensive lines. American armour poured through the gap, racing across France with unprecedented speed. Patton's Third Army led the advance, liberating territory so quickly that supply lines struggled to keep up. By early September, American forces had reached the Moselle River in eastern France, approaching the German border itself. The advance seemed unstoppable. German forces were retreating in disorder, abandoning equipment, suffering from fuel shortages and Allied air supremacy. Victory appeared imminent. But the German army, even in retreat, remained dangerous. Hitler had ordered a counter-offensive to halt the American advance and buy time for the West Wall defences along the German border to be reinforced. The 5th Panzer Army was assembled from available units and ordered to strike Patton's exposed flank. The Germans concentrated their attack near Arracourt, a small town in the Lorraine region. The terrain was rolling hills interspersed with forests and small villages, good tank country where manoeuvre and firepower could be decisive. German commanders were confident. They had Panthers and experienced crews. The Americans had Shermans and boys who'd been civilians a year earlier. The technical specifications told a damning story for American tankers. The German Panther tank mounted a 75mm KWK-42 high-velocity gun that could penetrate Sherman armour at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards. The Panther's sloped frontal armour was 80mm thick at an angle, providing protection equivalent to over 140 metres of vertical armour. A Sherman's 75mm M3 gun could only penetrate Panther frontal armour at point-blank range, and even then, unreliably. The Panther was faster, had better optics, and featured superior ergonomics. It was, by any objective measure, the better tank. German crews knew this. They expected to dominate the battlefield through technological superiority. What the Germans didn't understand was that the Sherman's apparent inferiority obscured fundamental American advantages that would prove decisive. The Sherman was reliable. It started every morning, ran all day, and required minimal maintenance. The Panther was temperamental, prone to transmission failures, and demanded constant attention from skilled mechanics. The Sherman used a radial aircraft engine that was simple to maintain with standard tools. The Panther used a complex Maybach engine that required specialized equipment and expertise. When Panthers broke down, and they broke down constantly, they became roadside monuments. When Shermans broke down, crew and maintenance teams had them running again within hours. American crew training was another decisive advantage. New tankers arriving in France had spent months training at Fort Knox and other facilities. They'd fired hundreds of rounds, learned to work as teams, practiced communication and coordination. German replacement crews by late 1944 received minimal training. Fuel shortages meant limited driving practice. Ammunition shortages meant limited gunnery training. Some German crews arrived at the front having never fired their tank's main gun. The technical superiority of their equipment couldn't compensate for inadequate training. The American command structure provided advantages that Germans failed to appreciate. Every Sherman tank had a radio. Every platoon could communicate with every other platoon instantly. Company commanders coordinated entire units with radio calls. Battalion commanders orchestrated complex maneuvers across miles of front. This level of communication was unprecedented. The Germans had radios too, but not in the same density. Many German tanks lacked radios entirely, relying on hand signals or flag commands. In fluid combat situations, this communication gap was crippling. Combined arms integration gave Americans yet another edge. American doctrine emphasized cooperation between tanks, infantry, artillery, and air support. Tank commanders could call for artillery strikes on specific targets within minutes. Forward air controllers could direct fighter-bomber strikes against enemy armor that appeared on the battlefield. Infantry supported tank advances, suppressing anti-tank teams and clearing obstacles. The Germans understood combined arms warfare in theory, but lacked the resources to implement it effectively by September 1944. Their infantry was depleted, their artillery was short of ammunition, and the Luftwaffe was nearly non-existent. German Panther crews often fought without support, their technical advantages negated by American ability to bring overwhelming combined firepower against them. The Battle of Arracourt began in the pre-dawn darkness of September 19th. German forces launched their attack through thick fog, hoping to close with American positions before being detected. The initial assault fell on Combat Command A of the 4th Armored Division, one of the most experienced American armored units in Europe. The Germans had assembled over 260 tanks for the offensive, including dozens of Panthers from the 111th and 113th Panzer Brigades. Against them, the Americans could field roughly 150 tanks, virtually all Shermans. The numbers favored the Germans. The terrain favored the Germans. The weather favored the Germans. None of it mattered. American forward observers spotted German movement despite the fog. Radio calls alerted tank platoons to prepare for action. Artillery fire missions were calculated and called in before German tanks came within visual range. The first German Panthers advancing through the fog suddenly found themselves under artillery bombardment. Shells crashed around them, forcing the columns to spread out and lose formation cohesion. Then American Shermans opened fire from prepared positions, using terrain for cover and concealment. The German advantage in frontal armor meant nothing when American gunners were targeting side and rear armor as Panthers maneuvered through the rolling hills. Sergeant Shepard's first kill that morning was a Panther that appeared through the fog at barely 400 yards. His gunner, Corporal Mike Sullivan, acquired the target instantly. The German tank was moving perpendicular to their position, exposing its side armor. Sullivan fired without waiting for the command. The 75 millipore armor-piercing round hit the Panther just below the turret ring. Secondary explosions erupted as ammunition cooked off. The German crew bailed out, running for cover as their tank burned. Shepard's crew had trained for this exact scenario dozens of times. The textbook called it a flanking shot. Catch the enemy moving across your front, hit the weak side armor, destroy before they can react. Theory had become bloody reality. The German attack stalled within hours. What was supposed to be a crushing advance turned into a meeting engagement where American advantages in communication and coordination proved decisive. German Panthers found themselves isolated, unable to coordinate with supporting units, taking fire from multiple directions. American Shermans operated in platoons, covering each other, calling in artillery and air support, maneuvering aggressively. When a Sherman was hit, others covered its retreat while calling for recovery vehicles. German Panthers damaged in combat were often abandoned because recovery assets couldn't reach them through American fire. The psychological shock to German tankers was profound. These were experienced crews, many veterans of the Eastern Front, where they'd fought Soviet T-34s and KV-1s. They expected American tankers to fight cautiously, to respect the Panthers' superiority, to avoid direct confrontation. Instead, they encountered aggressive crews who maneuvered for advantage, who closed to effective range despite casualties, who fought with a confidence that seemed unwarranted given their equipment. The technical superiority that German propaganda had promised meant nothing when American tank platoons worked together while German Panthers fought individually. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams commanded one of the 4th Armoured Division's tank battalions and became legendary during the Arracourt fighting. Abrams was 29 years old, a West Point graduate who understood that tank warfare was about more than gun penetration and armour thickness. He trained his battalion relentlessly in tactics, communication, and combined arms coordination. His tanks operated as a unified force, each platoon knowing where the others were and what they were doing. When German counterattacks developed, Abrams positioned his tanks in depth, allowing forward units to engage, while reserves manoeuvred for flank attacks. His radio calls coordinated battalion-level responses to tactical situations within minutes. The weather remained terrible throughout the battle, with fog and rain reducing visibility and turning fields into mud. These conditions should have negated American advantages in coordination and air support. Instead, they revealed yet another German weakness: logistics. Panther tanks consumed fuel at prodigious rates. The German supply situation was desperate, with fuel trucks struggling to reach forward units through American artillery fire and air attacks. Panthers ran out of fuel in the middle of combat operations and had to be abandoned. Shermans, with their more efficient engines and better supply lines, remained mobile. The irony was bitter. The superior German tanks became pillboxes and then scrap metal while the inferior American tanks kept fighting. Individual actions during the battle demonstrated how crew quality overcame equipment limitations. On September 20th, a single Sherman platoon led by Sergeant Lafayette Poole engaged a German column including 5 Panthers. Poole used terrain expertly, positioning his tanks on a ridgeline where they could fire down on the advancing Germans. His gunner destroyed one Panther with a shot to the turret ring, then shifted fire to a second Panther and hit its tracks, immobilizing it. The other Panthers attempted to return fire but couldn't elevate their guns enough to hit targets above them, a design limitation nobody had considered important. Poole's platoon destroyed or disabled all 5 Panthers without loss. Poole himself would be credited with 12 German tank kills during the Arracourt fighting, an incredible achievement given his weapons limitations. The German command structure struggled to respond to the American tactics. Orders from higher headquarters arrived hours late, describing situations that had already changed. Local commanders lacked the initiative to adapt quickly. The rigid German command philosophy that had worked in earlier campaigns failed against an enemy that encouraged subordinate initiative. American tank commanders made tactical decisions instantly, trusting their training and judgment. German tank commanders waited for orders, following doctrine even when situations demanded flexibility. This difference in command culture multiplied the Americans' tactical advantages. Air support played an increasingly important role as the weather intermittently cleared. American P-47 Thunderbolt fighter bombers hunted German armor throughout the battlefield. Equipped with rockets and bombs, they could destroy Panthers that Sherman guns couldn't penetrate frontally. American tank commanders carried radio frequencies for air support and could request strikes within minutes. The coordination was unprecedented. Ground forces marking targets with colored smoke, aircraft attacking within 5 minutes, then reporting results to ground commanders who adjusted tactics accordingly. German forces had no answer to this integration of air and ground power. Their tanks, superior in direct combat, were vulnerable to attack from above. The fighting around Arracourt continued for nearly 2 weeks, with German forces launching repeated attacks trying to achieve their operational objectives. Each attack followed similar patterns: initial German success based on technical superiority, then American response using superior tactics and combined arms, finally German retreat leaving destroyed and abandoned equipment. By late September, German losses exceeded 200 tanks, including over 50 Panthers. American losses were roughly 40 tanks, most of them recovered and repaired. The exchange ratio was devastating for the Germans, who could not afford such losses. More significantly, the psychological impact shattered German confidence in their technological superiority. The young American crews matured rapidly under combat pressure. 18-year-olds who'd never seen combat learned to fight with veteran composure. They discovered that training worked, that the tactics they'd practiced at Fort Knox applied on real battlefields, that coordination and communication could overcome equipment disadvantages. Sergeant Shepard's crew destroyed 4 German tanks during the battle without suffering serious damage themselves. Sullivan, the 20-year-old gunner, developed an almost instinctive ability to estimate range and calculate aim. The loader became so efficient that the time between shots decreased from the trained standard of 6 seconds to under 4 seconds. They became a team, functioning with the precision that training promised and combat delivered. German after-action reports from Arracourt reveal confusion and frustration. Unit commanders reported that their Panthers should have dominated but didn't. They complained about American artillery, American air support, American coordination. Some reports blamed mechanical failures. Others blamed inadequate reconnaissance. Few acknowledged the real problem, that American crews were simply better trained and better led. German military culture resisted admitting that the enemy might be superior in anything except material resources. The idea that American teenagers could outfight German veterans was psychologically unacceptable, so alternative explanations were constructed. The role of American artillery in the battle deserves emphasis. The 4th Armored Division's organic artillery battalions and attached corps artillery provided responsive fire support throughout the engagement. Forward observers with tank units called for fire missions constantly, disrupting German movements and forcing Panthers to button up, reducing their observation capabilities. American artillery doctrine emphasized rapid response. Fire missions were completed within minutes of being called. German artillery, chronically short of ammunition and lacking the communication systems for responsive fire, couldn't match this capability. The psychological effect on German tankers of being under constant artillery fire while their own artillery remained silent was significant. Maintenance and recovery operations demonstrated another American advantage. Every combat command had organic maintenance companies equipped with specialized recovery vehicles, spare parts, and trained mechanics. Damaged Shermans were recovered under fire, repaired quickly, and returned to action. The average Sherman knocked out in combat was back in service within 48 hours if the damage wasn't catastrophic. German Panthers often couldn't be recovered at all. Even those that could be retrieved required parts that weren't available and repairs that took days or weeks. The mathematical effect was that American tank strength remained relatively constant while German strength declined steadily. The weather finally cleared in late September, allowing American fighter bombers unrestricted access to the battlefield. German forces attempting to retreat found themselves under constant air attack. Columns of vehicles were strafed and bombed. Panthers abandoned due to mechanical failure or fuel exhaustion were systematically destroyed to prevent recovery. The roads leading back to German lines became graveyards of burned-out armor. American pilots reported targets so numerous they ran out of ammunition before running out of targets. The German 5th Panzer Army, which had begun the offensive with over 250 tanks, retreated with fewer than 50 operational vehicles. The tactical lessons from Arracourt influenced American armor doctrine for the remainder of the war. The emphasis on crew training was validated and intensified. Replacement crews arriving in Europe after Arracourt received even more extensive preparation. The importance of combined arms coordination was reinforced, with tank units training extensively with supporting infantry, artillery, and air elements. Most importantly, American forces gained confidence that they could defeat technically superior German armor through superior tactics and teamwork. This confidence translated into more aggressive operations in subsequent campaigns. The psychological impact on German forces extended beyond the immediate participants. Reports of the defeat at Arracourt circulated through German units across the front. The narrative of inevitable German technical superiority began to crumble. If Panthers could be defeated by Shermans, what did that say about the ultimate outcome of the war? German soldiers had been told repeatedly that their weapons were superior, that German training was superior, that victory was inevitable if they just fought hard enough. Arracourt contradicted all these assurances. The erosion of confidence had strategic implications as significant as the tactical defeat. Individual German tankers who survived the battle carried psychological scars. Interviews with former Panther crewmen reveal consistent themes: shock at American tactical proficiency, frustration with their own command structure, and bitter acknowledgement that the American teenagers they'd faced were better soldiers than they'd expected. Some German veterans expressed respect for American tankers in ways they rarely did for Soviet opponents. The Americans fought with a professionalism and competence that forced grudging admiration even from enemies who'd been conditioned to view them with contempt. The leadership provided by officers like Creighton Abrams exemplified American advantages that equipment specifications couldn't measure. Abrams led from the front, his command tank often in the most dangerous positions. He maintained radio communication with his subordinate units constantly, providing guidance without micromanaging, trusting his platoon and company commanders to execute missions effectively. This leadership style empowered junior officers and NCOs to make tactical decisions rapidly, creating an agile, responsive force that could react faster than German units burdened with rigid command structures. The contrast in leadership cultures was as significant as any technical factor. The broader strategic situation amplified the tactical defeat's significance. German forces needed a victory at Arracourt to stabilize the front and delay the Allied advance into Germany. The defeat meant that Patton's Third Army continued advancing, reaching the West Wall defences and eventually crossing into German territory. The Panthers and experienced crews lost at Arracourt were irreplaceable. Germany's industrial capacity was being devastated by strategic bombing. Fuel shortages were becoming critical. The loss of over 200 tanks in a single battle represented a catastrophic setback that German industry couldn't remedy. The American logistical system that supported operations at Arracourt deserves recognition as perhaps the most decisive factor in Allied victory. Fuel, ammunition, spare parts and replacement vehicles flowed forward constantly. Shermans lost in combat were replaced within days. Units remained at strength despite casualties. This logistical superiority meant that American forces could sustain combat operations indefinitely, while German forces exhausted themselves. The young American tankers fought with the confidence that comes from knowing support is reliable, that damaged tanks will be recovered, that ammunition will never run short, that they're part of an overwhelming machine that cannot be stopped. The technical debates about tank quality that dominated historical discussion for decades missed the essential point that Arracourt illustrated. The Sherman wasn't the best tank of World War II by most technical measures, but it was good enough for its purpose, could be produced in vast numbers, could be operated by minimally trained crews, and could be maintained with standard tools. These pragmatic virtues mattered more than maximum gun penetration or armor thickness. Wars are won by logistics, training, and industrial capacity, not by technical specifications optimized for controlled test conditions. The German obsession with producing technically superior weapons, Panthers, Tigers, King Tigers, diverted resources from more practical applications. Each Panther cost as much as 4 Shermans to produce and required 3 times the maintenance. For Germany's deteriorating strategic situation, this was disastrous resource allocation. They needed adequate numbers of reliable tanks more than they needed small numbers of technical marvels. The Americans understood this, producing over 50,000 Shermans during the war. The Germans produced roughly 6,000 Panthers. The mathematics of attrition warfare favored mass production of good enough equipment over limited production of technically superior equipment.